Now, for many golfers, when the driver is misbehaving or you need to hit a tight fairway, opting for the 3-wood seems like the most sensible option. A little bit more loft and that smaller head should give you more control to hit that fairway. That's the theory anyway, but does it play out in reality? Well, I've got the data that might prove it all wrong. So all of the data I'm going to be referencing in this video comes from Arccos Golf and their vast bank of real shots from real golfers on real golf courses. So far, they've logged over 750 million shots. So this is some really interesting data that we can dive into to look at whether that driver is more accurate or less accurate than the 3-wood. Now, if you've been using Arccos Golf over the last couple of years, then your driver shots and your 3-wood shots will be included in the data we're using today. And if you want to use Arccos Golf for yourself, I've put some handy links down in the description where you can find the best price in your location for a set of the smart sensors. So let's start with the headline news from this data then, and asking ourselves the question, are you more likely to hit the fairway with a 3-wood than with a driver? Now, in short, the answer is yes, but the results are nowhere near as resounding as you might think. So in fact, from handicaps ranging from 0 all the way up to 20, you are less than 1% more likely to hit the fairway with your 3-wood than with your driver. Less than 1%. Now, I think that's quite shocking. If I'd asked you that question before we had a look at this data, I think you might have said something like 15, 20, 25%, I don't know, but I think it'd be a lot more than 1. Now, when we're thinking about this as well, so you're going to be 1% more accurate, but according to the data, your average loss of distance with 3-wood to driver is 12 yards. Now, that doesn't really seem like a worthy trade-off to me. So let's delve down a little bit deeper into this data and go handicap by handicap to see how they perform with driver and 3-wood. So let's start this deeper dive by looking at scratch golfers to 5 index handicappers. Now, we're going to take a look at the percentage of fairways hit with each club, with driver and 3-wood, how far each club averages for distance, give us an idea of what that trade-off is, as well as looking at a really interesting stat that Arccos have given us, looking at the percentage of shots that finish under 30 yards from the center of the fairway. So this is like, not a fairway hit, but we're less than 30 yards from the center. So it might be first cut, it might be rough, depending on how wide the hole is. But I think it's a really interesting stat to bear in mind, a bit more nuance to it. So starting with a scratch golfer then, they find the fairway just 2.4% more of the time with the 3-wood than they do with the driver. And they average 15 yards less with the high lofted 3-wood, as you might expect. There is quite a big percentage change with scratch golfers when we're looking at that category of less than 30 yards from the center of the fairway. Indeed, scratch golfers are missing that, so that 30-yard distance, just less than 4% of the time with the 3-wood. So there's a little bit of a gain there. Again, it's only marginal at 4%, and that 15 yards of distance you're giving up, I don't think quite warrants it. It's an interesting thing to think anyway. If we look at a 5 handicapper, that dispersion's even smaller. A 5 handicapper will hit the fairway 1.3% more of the time with their 3-wood. And this rises to 3.3% of the time for those shots under 30 yards from the center of the fairway. So again, really not a big difference here. And much like that scratch golfer, a 5 indexer is sacrificing 14 yards when hitting their 3-wood instead of their driver. So let's move on to 10 to 15 index handicap golfers now. And while it might be expected that the performance and the percentage of fairways hit with 3-woods might go up a little bit with these higher index golfers, the opposite is actually true. So if we look at a 10 index golfer, they are only 0.7% more likely to hit the fairway with their 3-wood, which is, that's barely anything. Even more amazingly, I think here, a 15 handicapper is more likely to miss the fairway with their 3-wood than with their driver. So we're now flipping it on its head entirely here. Now, admittedly, that's only by 0.3%. So it's not a lot, but it's still interesting to note, I think, that the idea that the 3-wood is a safety club is not the case, especially for 15 handicap golfers. Now, as was the case with our scratch and 5 index handicapper, we're losing a fair chunk of yardage as well. So for that 10 handicapper, the loss of distance averages at 13 yards, and for the 15 handicapper, we're losing 11 yards. So I'm going to stop with the 15 indexer there and just say to hit the fairway less often, you're also sacrificing 11 yards. So that myth, I guess we're proving now, that the 3-wood is a safe club, for 15 handicappers in particular, definitely isn't true. So finally then, let's look at the 20 index golfer, perhaps a more common index, perhaps watching at home now, you're a 20 indexer. Let's see how you're getting on with this 3-wood versus driver. And again, the differences are minuscule. For a 20 index golfer, they're gonna hit the fairway 0.8% of the time more with that 3-wood. So listen, really not a lot. Interestingly, the difference in distance is a little bit less, so you're only sacrificing 10 yards as a 20 handicapper, whereas we were at about 15 yards with the scratch golfer, so you can see the difference in the quality of striking, I guess, there. But again, for 0.8% more fairways, that sacrifice of 10 yards, I think, especially for a 20 handicapper, is quite a lot. So what happens when we put all of this together then? Let's bring all the handicaps back together again and give ourselves an average of all golfers out there from this Arccos set of data. Well, as you can see, if we put everybody together, you're more likely to hit the fairway with a 3-wood 0.9% of the time, so less than 1% with your driver. And that average distance drop-off with all handicaps was around 12 or 13 yards. Now that is probably a different iron in the bag approach-wise, isn't it? A 7 over an 8 iron, which you'll have more control over. So we're thinking about, is that distance trade-off worth it for not a lot more accuracy? If we contextualize this and say that there are 14 chances per round to hit a fairway, that's assuming that most golf courses have 4 par 3s. That equates to finding 1 extra fairway every 8 rounds. And that's that 12 yards you're giving up on every shot. While we're here then, let's take a look at my data for this, because I've been using Arccos now for a couple of years. I've got 3,500 shots logged on here now. So I thought it'd be interesting to compare my data with that of the larger group that we're doing here. And I fall very much into type about what we've been talking about here. So with my drive, I hit the fairway a whopping and eye-watering 40% of the time. Not great, I know, I'll work on it. But I averaged 256 yards off the tee. So there's my accuracy and my distance. Now with my 3-wood, I averaged 241 yards. So there's that drop off of 15 yards we were seeing for some of the lower index golfers. But I only hit the fairway 34% of the time. So the quote unquote safer club when I want to try and find a fairway isn't my 3-wood, because I'm not only missing it more than my driver, but I'm 15 yards worse off. Now it's really something interesting to think about here. I was really interested to see mine versus the group data on here. And it would actually make a lot more sense for me, if I was thinking about doing the safer option, is to pull the hybrid out of my bag. Now, I averaged 212 yards with this club, so that's obviously losing a lot, but I hit the fairway 45% of the time. Still not a lot really, is it? I need to work on my fairways and regulation, but if I'm on a tee and I'm like, Dan, I need to hit a fairway here, the 3-wood isn't the club, as though I might have thought before. It would be the hybrid, or even a 5-iron if a fairway is that important. The drop-off in distance is huge, but that real safe club is much lower down the bag than the 3-wood. So, some final thoughts then on what I think has been a really interesting dive into this part of the bag, and I think we can really walk away from this video with some interesting course management skills next time you're on the course. Now, there's no denying that across the board, the 3-wood technically is more accurate, and you are going to find more fairways, but the results are so marginal, as we saw. And if you're a 15 index golfer, and me, you're missing more often with your 3-wood than the driver, and you're sacrificing all that yardage. Now, there's a few reasons why this might be the case. You know, there's a bit of a bias toward getting fitted for your driver, so maybe you feel more comfortable over it than your fairway would, and that bigger head might inspire a bit more confidence. But regardless of the reason as to why the driver isn't as wayward as the 3-wood as we thought, I think it's worth just sitting back and thinking, if my fairway finder, my safe club, let's drop that a little bit further down the bag next time. Whether it's a 5-wood, 7-wood, I'd move down to my 4 hybrid now. That's the next thing I'm gonna do when I need to find a fairway. Drop down to that 4 hybrid. Even a 5-iron, a 7-iron, I don't care. Whatever you need to find the fairway. But I think we've busted the myth that 3-wood is safer than driver, that's for sure. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video and this deep dive into the specific part of the game. As I said at the top, we've got access to Arccos's vast bank of data, 750 million shots from real golfers on real golf courses. So if there's anything you want to see me dive into like this for specific handicap indexes or for shots on specific parts of the golf course, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you and put a video together looking at that. But for now, thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time.